John. Thank you all for coming out today. Just as some other logistics, so my name is Matt Cruz. I'm the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Director for Relief International. Myself and Mary Kate Costello, you'll see her also walking around. If you need anything throughout the day, please just let either of us know. And with that, I would like to introduce the CEO for Relief International, Nancy Wilson, who will be giving some opening remarks. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, it strikes me, first off, let me say happy birthday to Mahatma Gandhi, 150 years, quite a remarkable legacy that he continues to leave us in standards to which we all can strive. So I think this is a really great way to start the day, gathered to celebrate, learn about, and encourage one another to get even better at community-led development. So, and on behalf of the organizers and sponsors, and with thanks to them, welcome all of you. My job here is to set the stage and kind of get the ball rolling, so I thought that I would start with some kind of participatory activity because after all, that's what's behind all of this. Space is a bit tight, so I'm not going to ask you to kind of move around into small groups and start, probing the depths of whatever. But I will ask you to raise your hand or stand up, so get comfortable. And don't overthink. So the first question is, when it comes to planning and implementing community-led programming, would you rate yourself as a novice, an intermediate, or an expert? So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in turn. Okay. So just pick which one of those. Everyone should have their hand up at some point stage. So our novice group, who would say novice? Intermediate? And experts? Woo! Great! Look what we got in the room. That's fantastic. Okay, now here's a little different take on the question, and I'm going to ask you to stand. So the question is, have you ever been a participant? Not a facilitator, not an organizer, but actually a participant, a community member in a community-led development or programming activity. So think for a moment. It can come in a lot of different, we are all parts of very different communities, so it could be in a lot of different dimensions. So for those who've never had that experience, you want to stand up quickly?
Never?
Well, great.
By participants.
Never. Don't overthink. Don't overthink. No, stay standing. Stay standing.
Yeah,
I want to just ask you, if you've never been in the experience before, then why are you here and why do you think it's important? What led you to think it was important? Yeah.
Well, I've never been a beneficiary. That's how I define it rather narrowly.
Okay.
I've never needed it, fortunately.
Okay.
But I've been on the other side.
All right. That's one way to look at it. Great. Over there?
Yeah. I can't think of an example right now, but I wonder if I have been a participant at some point in my life. I absolutely believe this is important. Having worked in international development for 10 years, I'm a little bit new to this movement, but happy to know that it's been so active and eager to learn more.
Great, great. Anyone else?
Because I see the changes that it makes.
Okay, because you've seen it with your own eyes. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, and so then, those of you who didn't stand for no, I expect to see you stand up now when I say, if you have been a participant in a community-led process of some sort, please stand up. Great, are you getting your blood going, circulating? Fantastic. And then I would ask you, oh, okay, sorry. Reflecting on that experience, if you felt that you were heard and that the process made a difference, then stay standing. Not every participatory process is a success. We all know this. So stay standing. And if not, you can sit down. If you thought, no, not so much. Okay, so for those of you who are still standing, what was effective or powerful about the experience? Again, I'll just take a few volunteers. John.
The people who were facilitating the process were very appreciative of everyone who participated.
Okay.
It's like no one was made to feel less left than thou.
Okay, okay, very cool. Any other? Yes.
The the exercise that really made me realize they care was something called Fist 5. For those that aren't familiar, as opposed to just saying, okay, do you like the idea, do you not like the idea, hands up, hands down. If you strongly supported it, you had 5 fingers raised, and if you were strongly against it, you had a fist raised. And if you were in between, it was 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger. And what that showed us, it wasn't just a binary black, white, yes, no.
Fantastic.
It was truly a landscape of how strongly does the group, the entire group, like it or not like it, and the kind of conversation that came from that approach as opposed to the yes, no, blew my mind. It was something I'd never experienced.
Fantastic. So sometimes just the technique itself can just be really powerful and engaging. And over here, you want to say something about what was powerful about it?
What was powerful for me was that I understand from the facilitator that it's not just about a project, it is about a partnership, truly partnership in the community.
Okay.
So the non-ending, no phase out
Okay.
feeling.
Fantastic. Great. I'll let you sit down now. You can carry on with your coffee and muffins. So the reason I did this is partly because I think it's really important to understand ourselves, where our motivation comes from in this, where our own values are, where our own experiences are that we're bringing to these conversations today. So I'm going to share 2 stories of my own. One, I was chief of party on an adult education strengthening program in Namibia, shortly after Namibia's independence. And we were doing training of trainers, and at one point we brought in a new master trainer. And we said to her, great, I'm glad you're here, we've got the participant list, and look, here's the schedule, the training starts, whatever day it was, go for it. And she looked at it and she said, no, actually, we're not going to do it that way. If what we're trying to do is do a training of trainers around participatory process, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find 2 or 3 of them to be master trainers. So that's going to be our sort of square one. And then we're going to start with doing participatory assessment of assets and needs, not with just starting to train people on facilitation techniques, because otherwise we're training to our idea of what people need, not their idea of what they need, and also not knowing what their strengths are. So she totally blew up our design and delivered amazing development. And then she was never at the front of it. She had Namibians leading the process from beginning to end when the training of trainers was going on. What I found in working with her is that it reminded me of yoga breathing. Any of you do yoga, have done yoga? Sometimes with yoga you take a deep breath and then the leader says, okay, take another sip. And you think, my lungs are full, and you take another sip and another sip. So I found working with this trainer was a bit that way. Just when I thought I'd wrapped my mind around the idea, it was, well, now take another sip, because it's going to get a step more, deeper and more complex and more engaging. I'll come back to that in a little bit. The other experience that leads me to be part of CLD is that after 16 years in Africa in a variety of roles, I moved to Boston and worked at Tufts University, and I had the real pleasure of leading the College of Civic Life there. And our mission as this little unit within the larger university was to build the effectiveness of Tufts students as active and engaged citizens in the world. There are about 10,000 students on the Tufts campus at any given time, from the medical school, undergraduates, engineers, veterinarians, the full range of disciplines. And after that time in Africa, I got thinking, okay, we had a budget of about $3 to $4 million a year just to develop the civic skills of these arguably very privileged students, right? Regardless of their background, they were now on the campus of an elite university studying with amazing faculty, and yet we somehow felt that they really didn't know how to express their voice, how to engage with communities, how to be effective and engaged citizens on whatever topic was of interest to them. And I thought, goodness, if that's the deficit we see, that's the need we see in these students in this very privileged environment, what hope do people have who are living in an environment of very autocratic leadership. How can they possibly be building the skills that are required for being effective citizens and engaged citizens? And when we broke down the skills that we were trying to develop at Tufts, it really came to three. One of those was deliberation. How do you disagree and come to some shared sense of priorities? And I would argue in some of the places that we work without killing one another, right? How do you do this in some kind of a hospitable environment? Can you be transparent about what your goals are? So how can we as an NGO be transparent about what our responsibilities are, and ask the community also to be transparent about their responsibilities in any program, in any partnership? And then how can we be accountable for delivering or not on the things that we said we would be setting out to do? So these skills that were sort of fundamental in what we were working on at Tufts have equally influenced, from my perspective, the kinds of skills we need to be developing when we're engaging with communities in whatever kind of work we're doing. Even when the program is not about governance, it can be an education program, but you engage the parents in the PTA or the whatever is you call it in any given country, and because they've got a job to do just as we have a job to do together. So to me, these were very different experiences, but where the aha kind of moment about how this all works. So for me, with this, the bottom line is authenticity. If we're going to say to anyone that we understand a community and what kinds of programs are appropriate for that community, to be able to uplift their quality of life, the sense of safety and security, and the hopefulness for the future, or for where Relief International works, to help make the transition from fragility to stability, then we have to truly understand the community, not our impression of the community, but their understanding of themselves. Not our assessment of their needs, but their assessment and affirmation of their assets and their aspirations. So let's start with filling our lungs and taking more sips over the course of the day, more sips of challenge and engagement. We'll have plenty of time to exhale so that we can take another breath. Bonnie Glick is bringing us today an enormous amount of experience. She is the Deputy Administrator at USAID, basically the Chief Operating Officer. And I just switched to my notes about something else entirely. There we go. She spent a dozen years in the Foreign Service, speaks 7 languages, and I always think when you speak a foreign language, it's not just that you're able to say something, but you really have to understand the culture and values that are embedded in that language. So it's a really powerful skill and knowledge to bring. She is the co-author on 3 patents from time at IBM, so clearly an innovator. And she also served as Deputy Secretary of Aging in Maryland. So that understanding both the wisdom of seniors and the challenges. I'm delighted that she's here to bring that range of depth and experience to USAID and to us today. So please welcome Deputy Administrator Glick and have a day full of participation.
Nancy, thank you for that very kind introduction. My father used to say to me that if you can dream in another language, you know that you're fluent. So over the course of time, I've studied several languages, but I no longer dream in a lot of them. but it really was, I felt like, a very good gauge of how you understood not just the way people speak, but the culture that people come from. I love the idea of taking sips during the course of the day, and I think we'll be taking some sips during the course of these remarks. So, good morning. Thank you all very much for being here. If you all have been following the progress at USAID under the Trump administration, you've surely heard by now what we call the journey to self-reliance. It's the philosophy that our role is to help our partner countries find their own paths towards self-reliance and sustainable development, working toward the day when foreign assistance is no longer necessary. This is fundamentally the hashtag shift the power that we're talking about here today. What underlies this approach to development work is an even more fundamental principle, and that is respect for human dignity. While Americans will always stand with those who have suffered from natural or regime-driven disasters, and while we'll walk alongside those who are willing to take the difficult steps down the road to self-reliance, we're also keenly aware that nothing is so corrosive to the human soul as long-term dependency. Gandhi believed that real power must lie with the people. He dreamed of a network of self-sufficient villages and communities. The journey to self-reliance is rooted in human dignity and agency, principles espoused by Gandhi, principles that are at the heart of our own democracy, and principles which we seek to embed in all dimensions of our work. If you do something for someone else that they can do for themselves, you're doing them no favors. In fact, in the long run, you're probably doing them harm. That is the root of USAID's priority on fostering self-reliance. The goal of this symposium is to learn from one another about improving engagement with local communities and local partners within emerging economies. It could hardly align more serendipitously with what we at USAID are doing. We're shifting away from a government-to-government model. We're bringing in new players, many of them local, to shift service delivery. We're even changing our language. In development, we frequently refer to the countries in which we work as developing countries. As Nancy said, I worked at IBM, and in IBM and in other businesses, we call those very same countries emerging markets. And we in development talk about aid beneficiaries. But in business, they're referred to as clients and customers. And I have to say, I don't think there's any mother who hopes that her child will be raised as a refugee or in an IDP camp. Every mother wants her child to be raised to be a consumer. So we begin with a simple premise that every one of our programs should look forward to the day when it can end. Around the world, we should measure ourselves by how much each of our investments brings us closer to that end each day. To make that approach work as a practical matter, we have to understand where countries are on their journeys and where they have come from. And we also have to acknowledge that every country is in a unique spot on its own path in terms of both its capacity for and its commitment to various sources of change. And so at USAID, we've spent months coming up with independent metrics, not our numbers, but data from respected, open, outside sources, many of which you all use on a regular basis as well. We make customized profiles for every low and middle income country on earth, all of which are available to the public on our website. We call this compiled atlas the roadmaps toward development. On the capacity side, we look at the ability of government, business, civil society, and citizens to adjust to global standards of transparency, accountability, tolerance, and inclusiveness. On the commitment side, we analyze the extent to which leaders, key institutions, and populations are prepared to embrace these principles, along with the basic tenets of citizen-responsive governance and open economies. These roadmaps give us an extremely helpful, quantifiable sense of understanding where a country has been, where it wants to go, and what its future could look like. More than anything else, We see how much a given country has skin in the game, and we see that empirically using the best data available. The data are constantly being updated. In fact, yesterday we released the new country roadmaps for fiscal year 2020. We hope you'll check them out on the Journey to Self-Reliance portal on USAID's website, and that you'll find them as useful as our ambassadors and mission directors around the world have. The agency has also created a new acquisition and assistance strategy, including what we call a new partnerships initiative. This is aimed at doing a better job engaging with the private sector, particularly with new, underutilized, and non-traditional partners. Decades of research and experience in development work have made it clear to us that local partnerships, pursuing local solutions, often provide effective and inclusive results. Whether you're working with local civil society, the local private sector, or local political leadership. That holds true even in the realm of development financing, over the long term at any rate, because no initiative can be considered a success if it is not sustainable. It isn't based on a sound business model that can survive the end of external support. Internally, USAID's policy framework is an all-points bulletin to our own staff to reimagine and diversify our partnerships, to seek out and work with whoever is best positioned to get jobs done effectively, reliably, and ethically. That position is sometimes as close to the ground as possible in a given country, and it may be held by organizations that have been there for a long time, with strong pre-existing networks and institutional relationships. These organizations are often in the private sector or faith-based communities, though by no means always. Typically, local organizations are relatively small, with fewer lawyers or government relations departments. So we're working mightily to streamline and simplify for them the process of working with the U.S. federal government. It has not been a small undertaking, as most of you can imagine. But the whole point of the exercise is that these NGOs are often where we find more energy, more flexibility, and more innovative thinking. So if that's what we're expecting from our partners, it benefits us at USAID to demonstrate at least a little flexibility ourselves. One of the ways we've tried to do this is by increasing the use of subawards, also known as facilitative partnering or transition awards. In this scenario, an established recipient of USAID funding provides a mentoring umbrella, if you will, for new and smaller organizations. It serves as a conduit for their access to funding and building their capacities for meeting compliance requirements. We're also making a concerted effort to move away from traditional headquarters-driven transactional mentalities and more toward more equal partnerships based on mutual accountability and shared goals and values. The key to this paradigm shift lies in engaging with our partners much earlier in the planning process as co-designers, co-implementers, really as co-owners of their own development objectives. Nancy mentioned that I co-authored 3 patents, and one of the things that I know and understand deeply and profoundly from that is the level of intellectual property that one possesses at that level is something that cannot easily be transferred to others, so why not share it in this environment? Again, it's not an easy lift, but it's absolutely essential, particularly with locally based partners. If we really believe what we're saying that we want to do about building self-reliance and resilience in emerging economies, then we have to make it so that they'll be able to join us as equals on the world stage, and eventually, we hope, those very countries may become donors themselves. A number of countries, like South Korea, Israel, and India, have done exactly that. which you might imagine is a source of great pride for everyone who's involved. The U.S.-India development relationship spans more than 70 years, during which USAID has helped India overcome some of its most pressing needs, like acute food insecurity, while also strengthening the government's capacity to manage and implement its own development agenda. Our mission and programming there have evolved in parallel with India's growth. What began as a traditional donor-recipient relationship has become a peer-to-peer partnership in addressing regional development issues. Between 2012 and 2018, the Government of India's foreign assistance budget, exceeded $1 billion annually, including more than $834 million in support to South Asia. Today, India is often the first responder to natural disasters and crises in the region, for example, after the 2015 Nepal earthquakes. Just last week, Prime Minister Modi announced the new Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure at the United Nations General Assembly. Developed in consultation with more than 35 countries, the coalition will partner with national governments, the UN, multilateral development banks, the private sector, and think tanks to promote the resilience of new and existing infrastructure systems to tackle climate and disaster risks. In recognition of India's leadership role in the region and globally, today, USAID is proud to announce $1.6 million in support of the new India-led initiative to support India's efforts, the South Asia Regional Disaster Risk Reduction Program. In addition, our USAID mission in India continues to work on key priority sectors such as hygiene and nutrition, finding new and innovative ways to partner with the private sector on performance-based programs. This initiative and more, we believe, embody the enduring spirit of sustainable development of Mahatma Gandhi, who we're here today to honor. These are busy and exciting times for us at USAID. We have been heartened to see the enthusiasm with which the idea of the journey to self-reliance has caught on in the development sector. It's not such a revolutionary idea, of course, because not many people outside of China's One Belt, One Road initiative will look you in the eye and claim, gee, a little dependency really isn't that bad. But still, even for those who genuinely want to help emerging economies lift themselves sustainably out of poverty, it can be a challenge to keep your eyes on the prize day after day at the operational level. The logistical and other practical tasks involved in launching and running any kind of successful program, just keeping the lights on and the doors open, whether in agriculture or civil society, it all takes an enormous amount of work and commitment. We know that. And yet increasingly, we see exactly that, a determination to provide a hand up, not just a handout, is blossoming far and wide across the development sector. It fills all of our hearts with joy. I might add that it also makes the concept of foreign assistance a much easier sell to the American taxpayers. So let me offer my best wishes to all of you today for this successful event, and I hope that others will follow your lead in commemorating Gandhi's legacy by placing such a priority on human dignity. It is a high calling indeed. So with that, I'm going to thank you and hand the mic over, I think, to Raj, maybe to John. Okay, and thank you all so much for having me here today.
Yes, I'm not Raj. Raj's father died just the other day, so he could not be with us today. And he really wanted to, and his staff were really working hard to make that a possibility, and it's just not going to happen. So all of us send our deep condolences. Those of us who've lost a parent know how painful a transition it probably will happen to us all, but it is a painful time. So our prayers and love go to Raj today. Now, my name is John Coonrod. I'm the co-founder of the Movement for Community-Led Development, and I'm Executive Vice President at the Hunger Project. And my role here will be to brief you on the movement, because a lot of you are new to participating in the movement. I will need a volunteer. I need one volunteer, raise a hand, to be my PowerPoint remote operator. Oh, there it is. Will you sit there, and when I say next, hit it again. Next. So I am here on behalf of these 64 wonderful organizations, a number of whom are in the room, and dozens more who are local community-based organizations or national NGOs within the countries that have started their own chapters of the Movement for Community-Led Development. Because as Bonnie pointed out, the real decisions for development, the real policy changes that are going to be necessary, the advocacy for those policies and the implementation for those policies must be done by the people who live in those countries. I particularly, next, want to celebrate two of our members who generously financially supported us in our ability to have this today, and particularly Ascension Global Mission, who's one of our newest members, and Andrea's here, right in front. Andrea Leaf International, whose CEO you just heard from. Also, we're in the home, this beautiful home, of two of our member organizations, Bread for the World and the Alliance to End Hunger. And Asma's here. I don't know if anyone else from the Alliance is here. But, Eric is here. There's a bunch of Bread for the World people here, which is great. So, next. Now, throughout today, there's going to be direct digital enhanced participation. So pull out your phones and go in your browser to this address, polev.com/THPglobal977. I put the digits in blue so you wouldn't confuse ones and L's. So, what word describes your understanding of human dignity? I think this is good. Hit next. So, this next question is, what would you like out of today? You can just throw in a sentence and we'll see them pop up. Inspiration. Wonderful. Learning. Community. Wow, I should have done another word cloud. You can put full sentences if you like. New ideas, lots of inspiration. So, friendship, encouragement, collaboration, that's great. Connections. We have lots of opportunities for that. Human dignity, that is what we're here for. Human dignity is the basis of the entire international order. It is the fundamental principle of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose preamble states that every human person is born equal in dignity and in rights. And that respect for human dignity, the fundamental sanctity, that foundational principle of human dignity is the foundation for the democratic values that we stand for, that we hope to fulfill this great experiment of democracy, and a set of principles which in many places around the world are under threat. Next. So just this week, Monday night, I was at the IFAS Awards, Democracy Awards, and a bipartisan group of organizations and people and a transatlantic group with the inventor of the feminist foreign policy, Margot Wallström, were there. Steve Hadley, who was in the George W. Bush National Security Advisor, Madeleine Albright. They brought some very sober messages to us and a rallying cry. Their rallying cry is that those of us who care and are going to fight for democratic values in our world can't just be concerned with elections, because, you know, all kinds of dictators around the world were elected. We have to make sure that democracy delivers. And the way, from our perspective in the Movement for Community-Led Development, is the key to where democracy delivers is in communities. If your plumbing breaks down, you don't want to have to go to Congress or Parliament to fix it. Sometimes you do, but you shouldn't have to. If the school teachers aren't showing up, there should be a local government that's able to make that happen. If the nurses aren't showing up, if the doctors aren't showing up, if the agriculture extension workers aren't showing up or aren't doing their job well, they are public servants. There needs to be a strong local government and a strong civil society working together in your community. And that holds true for everyone. Next. Who knows what this is? Yes?
I think it's Gandhi, where Gandhi used to.
This is where Gandhi worked.
Yeah.
This is Gandhi's writing desk. And on the day that Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, January 30th, he left behind a note on that writing desk. And that note said, you know, when it just seems to be too much, think of the face of the poorest person you've ever seen and ask yourself whether the action that you contemplate will restore that person to control over their own life and destiny. That is the heart of community-led development. He didn't say, will it feed people? Will it clothe people? Will it build a new clinic? He said, will it restore people to control over their own lives and destiny? That is the essence of all those words that were put up there for human dignity. Next. So I know every day I look at this picture because for billions of people, the face of the poorest person that I've ever seen is a hardworking food farmer. Shipping food to this woman is not what's needed. She has no access to education, no access to health care, and perhaps most importantly, no access to voice over the decisions that affect her life. So what can we do as a human family in solidarity with her for her aspirations to be met? One thing for sure is for her and her baby on her back is that responsive set of institutions needs to be within walking distance. Her voice is going to need to be expressed within walking distance. Next. On the day that the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, this movement was launched. And somehow somebody got word to the Pope to put in a plug for us because he made this exact same point. He said it's all well and good for you all to create goals and targets. But we have to remember we're talking about real women and men escaping poverty. And for enable these real men and women to escape from extreme poverty, we must allow them to be dignified agents of their own development. Next.
Destiny.
He just said development in that case.
No, he said destiny.
He did?
Yeah. So
Oh, you're right. Their own destiny. Thank you for, see, this is participatory. So we launched this movement with the recognition that for at least 12, and maybe more, of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, mobilizing the community and transforming its governance to be real and responsive and well-funded is what I call that big blue circle. And for a lot of us in the NGO community, there was no name for that work of mobilizing communities and empowering communities and helping communities build their own institutions. And a lot of us had our own jargon for it. We all felt very frustrated and alone because there were no windows for really building that, for funding, for building that up. And then we came across some writing. Thanks again, Bonnie. We came across a think tank in Canada that had written a bunch of papers, and when several of us read those papers, we thought, they're talking about us. Click, next. They use the phrase community-led development. 2012, pretty recent. So suddenly we had a distinction, a powerful set of words that when we said them to people, they kind of understood what we were talking about. And that we could have this as an umbrella and that we could begin to work together because this is a science. There are methodologies and skills and phases to doing this work. And we have identified 5 goals in this movement. Next. Next. First is voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups within whatever community-led leadership structures there are. Next. Many of us have found that you can mobilize till the cows come home. But if you don't have a budget in that community, you won't get the roads built. You won't get the schools repaired. You won't be able to do development. So having adequate finance at the community level is a huge obstacle. Here in the rich countries, typically 50% of public resources are in the hands of local communities. In the kinds of communities where most of our organizations work, is maybe 2, 3, 4%. Next. Good local governance, I already mentioned, including responsive local functionaries, a democratically elected local council, and real meaningful civil society participation at the grassroots level with those local governments. Next. Quality public services, a real keystone of the Sustainable Development Goals. And next, resilience. So the kind of training and planning, people need to do that kind of thinking to make sure that they are prepared. Because truly who are the first responders are the people in that community. Maybe someday, a few days, a few weeks later, someone else may get there, but the community people themselves need to be ready to deal with any crisis, and more of them are happening, as we all know. Next. This has worked. Bonnie, when she was here, she mentioned Korea. Korea attributes all its wealth to a successful community-led development programming of the 1980s. It moved the needle for the mean income of rural families, actually surpassed that of the mean income of urban families. I don't know any other country. It went from being a least developed country to an OECD donor within 20 years. Other countries that have invested like this are Philippines, Indonesia, Brazil, Ethiopia. Most recently, Kenya, under its new constitution, 20% of all resources are in local counties. And Afghanistan, which had a very successful community-driven infrastructure program, really now has a full integrated multi-sectoral citizen-led program at the local level. So next. We've also been studying, some of the key studiers in the room, what the pathway is to get community-led development to national scale, which is the goal of this movement. Usually some NGOs get together, form a consortium, and do a good scale demonstration, not a small scale demonstration, but a good scale demonstration that receives the blessing and partnership of the national government and starts to get them excited about this as a real possibility. Then a real government partnership at an intermediate level. Getting to that intermediate level, maybe 10% of the districts in a country, is a key step that the countries that have gone to scale have gone through. And then finally, a real government-funded, full-scale community empowerment program that's nationwide. That's what our chapters are working on. That's the kind of solidarity we want to have globally. Next. This attention to communities and the recognition that communities have been marginalized is starting to get serious academic attention too. Just this year, 2 new books have come out. One by Ted Howard and Marjorie Kelly on the community wealth building. How do you build an economic economy? How do you shift the power of company ownership to the people in that community? Lots of wonderful case studies of that. And then a very thick book by the former chief economist of the IMF, The Third Pillar, How Markets and the State Leave the Community Behind. And he says that in the recent decades, the market system and the governmental system have centralized power and centralized ownership, and that must be rebalanced if we're going to get to where we need to get. Okay, next. So this is a big deal. This is, when I first discussed this with my friends at Oxfam, and people at Oxfam, they're like the best at advocacy, right? They said, ooh, you're talking deep transformation here. And I said, yeah, this is a big lift. Governments don't like letting go of power, they don't like letting go of money, even when it's to their advantage. So this is going to be a big lift, but as we've seen, it's happening in a bunch of countries. Next. So that's why we're here. Your creativity, your leadership, your teamwork, your collaborative power, and brought together in this movement can make big changes. So that's the purpose of today. Next. And now we'll go to coffee.